So, we'll call the meeting to order, and I mentioned that you were online and would be taking notes, and we'll note attendance.
Noted.
First up, we have an agenda review. Meeting agenda is published on Board Book. I would at this point accept a motion to approve the agenda as published.
I move to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second?
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion on the agenda tonight? No. Okay, Debbie?
Jonathan,
Yes.
Jennifer,
Yes.
Janet,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
Lori,
Yes.
and Tom.
Aye.
Thank you, all in favor.
All right.
Jonathan, just wanted to interject if I could, because we have Dawn Tacker here who's going to walk us through some policy updates. If, out of respect for her time, she didn't have to wait through the other discussion items.
Right.
If the board
It's fine by me.
would be okay with
yeah.
that, just to be respectful of Dawn's time.
All right, then what we'll do is we'll jump straight to 3E, policy updates. I believe there were 7 or 8 maybe on the list.
Good.
So let me start by saying that our intention at this point is, unless you guys have specific requests or questions, due 12 o'clock the day of your work session, typically we won't be here in person
Okay.
or online, but I hope that summary sheet is coming in handy. So I want to start with that and ask if anybody has any questions about the policies that are out this month for discussion.
I took a look. I didn't have any particular questions, I don't think. Let me just double check them. I did look at them all over the weekend.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions? Oh, I remember. There was one, it wasn't so much a question of the policy as much as it was sort of a broader question for you and or the work group. And I meant to send it in, but it's not really well, anyway, if it can be answered now, it can be answered another time. It's not urgent. The whole section on open enrollment was scratched out. That reminds me of a conversation that we had a couple of years ago. And I'm guessing this is part of actually all of that conversation and where that was going from a few years back. If anybody is prepared to speak to it, fine, and if not, next reading would be fine as well. But I did remember this afternoon that I wanted to ask about that.
So I'm sure Dan can chime in too. My understanding of that legislation, that was in 2019, but it had a sunset date, and that's why these changes are now being undone in some cases because those are no longer in statute. So
That's
is
my
there-
recollection. If we wanted a definitive, I would need to go look that up, but that is my recollection on
Okay.
that.
So yeah, just a couple were affected by that. Yeah, nothing super controversial in this month's edition. Yeah, anything else general or about these policies?
Looks like it's going to be real easy.
Okay, cool. So I would like to just mention, I saw that 3D is a discussion of procedures, and I'm going to maybe stay for that part unless we want to
Sure.
flip that and do that now. But I did have, I realized when I spoke to you guys 2 months ago, and I kind of went through a case study and talked about our process and what that looks like, I didn't really walk you through the whole thing, because I kind of made some, well, we just do this thing at work sessions and it's pretty self-evident, but I probably should have. So I can take a minute to do that now, or if we want to talk about 3D, I'm happy to chime in if that would be useful.
Well, let me just ask, do you guys want to go ahead and jump into 3D now? Or do you want to wait, and how do you feel you were going to be up first with the board?
Well, I would say, since it has to do with policy updates and the policy work group, if you wanted to update them with a point of information, Dawn, that might be appropriate if the board would like to do that.
I'm fine with it.
It's fine by me. I don't have any
Everyone's
objection.
so polite. Okay, so let me tack on what, I kind of presumed we were all sort of in the habit of doing, but also realizing, it's a new board with new board members. So I've kind of walked you through our process and then what happens when we get to work sessions and that first read. And I really stopped there. But the other parts of this process that are really integral to it, and in fact protect the whole process and the reason we do this process, is the second read and then the third read. So that first read only happens at work sessions, and we designed that because, you know, this is the focused time for you all to have an opportunity to look at things and to ask questions of us and to really, you know, have that conversation. The second read is always during a board meeting, as in public comment. Likewise, that third reading is always at a public meeting. So there are two built-in opportunities for public comment. So the policy that was, you know, kind of a stickler last time was one that, you know, because it was tabled, wasn't given the opportunity for that public comment. And when we designed this process, and it'll be almost 2 years in August, I had to look that date up, but it'll be 2 years this August that we've been, you know, fine-tuning this and really getting it down to where it works so well. Those 3 readings are pretty critical to what we do. And I think that there's been a lot of public trust around that. So I would just encourage you, when you have that discussion, that we talk about ways to protect that, while also allowing the board to have those discussions. And there's no reason why a policy could go to the third reading and the board could decide to vote, to table, or to throw it back to the policy work group. Those are always options to you. I would just encourage you, from my point of view, and, you know, being a volunteer on the group, but also being a parent in the district, to protect that piece, that integrity, and also that accountability, and that opportunity for public comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Dawn.
Yep.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, let's use that as a springboard into our conversation. So the topic is titled Process for Removing Policy from Consideration, but essentially it arose from some questions around our vote last week to remove a policy from consideration. So the idea here is that we would talk about what's both appropriate and or standard practice and or how the board feels in general about it. So as a recap, the motion was made to table, remove, however you want to word it, policy from consideration. And there was discussion, ultimately, and the board voted to remove the policy. Now, the question I think on the table is, what should the process be for the removal of a policy? And so I'll leave it there, and then, you know, I've got some thoughts that I can share, but I want to hear everybody else's feelings on this as well.
Well, I'll jump in if that's okay, just
Sure.
because I think I was primarily the one who brought this up as a request to be back on the agenda. So I think the way I was looking at it was that we have a process that was well established and that was working well, and that if there were issues with the policy, that we had mechanisms by which we could ask further questions, we could send it back to the policy work group, we could have discussion as a group. So when the motion to table came up, I think my question to you, Owen, was, well, wait, why are we tabling it? Like, in other words, whatever action we decide to take, it seems to me there should be substantive reason for saying, this is going to be an exception to our normal process, and this is why. It's a little bit, you know, akin to in December when we had a lot of really passionate public comment around masking and vaccines, and Aaron made a motion in the middle of the meeting to have a board conversation after that public comment. And I know we had a little bit of a discussion at that point, and like, wait a second, this is not how we normally do things. You know, what are the reasons for this? And we had that discussion. We decided, yeah, you know what, let's go ahead and do this. It seems important to a few members to have this conversation. And so that was a worthwhile, you know, discussion to have. What concerns me about the tabling in general is that it pulls the policy out of that really transparent, open debate process, which is, you know, it's very democratic, it's very open, it's very transparent. And if we pull the policy out of that, I think we circumvent that, and I think it seems really, I think we end up potentially breaching public trust. I think it becomes problematic because people wonder why that's been done. And you had made a comment, Jonathan, that, well, is there really a difference between tabling it now and voting it down later? And I think there is a substantive difference there, because you are letting it play through those 3 readings, as Dawn has indicated, and you're also making allowance for people's minds potentially being changed. You know, if we had really vigorous public comment at that 3rd reading, you may find board members say, well, you know what, I was going to vote it this certain way, but now my feelings have changed because I've heard input from the public. So I think those are my real concerns, that we're circumventing a process that is set up for a reason, and that moving counter to that seems unwise. And it also goes against our no surprises too, in the sense of, you know, us all sort of expecting that this is the process that we're going to work through, and then having that change all of a sudden. So, sorry, that was a little long-winded, I apologize, but those are
No,
my
it's
thoughts.
good to hear your perspective. Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I think we do have to look at the process, and even though, you know, some of us could have made an assumption how the vote was going to be, it's still completing the cycle. And let the vote be the vote. But the tabling does prevent the public from having that extra opportunity to weigh in. And I sort of feel like in some ways it kind of nicks the voices of the board in a way to have another opportunity to review and maybe speak their mind and say, you know, this is a little transitional for me. I'm starting to see other sides of this. So I think if we're going to encourage good discussion and keeping our minds as open as we can, no matter what the topic is, seeing it through the process. And I will say, this new process that we have for policies is so beautifully done, and thank you. But to slowly see various policies sort of pile up on this, we'll table this, is sort of creating that unfinished work. And that troubles me. That's my thoughts, but thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Any other thoughts? I mean, again, I've got some I can share.
Yeah, Jonathan, I'll go. You know, as I struggled with that and tried to figure out what I wanted to do with it, I read the cover sheets, and and OSBA specifically said at the bottom, it says, if you want to ban concealed handguns in this school, in your school, pass this. If you don't pass it. And so there was no way for that. I didn't want to see that pass, and I knew that there was nothing to debate. It was just, it was always going to be a no for me. So it just seemed like something that was just kind of dead on arrival for me. So that's why I just thought that was a good enough thing to do. And I know I said it in the meeting. I just know that it would be, you could kind of see the wind. I felt that it would probably just turn into this back and forth. Nobody's position is going to move, and you know, I felt that way, so I voted yes to table it, and apparently 3 other board members agreed with me. But you know, if someone's mind can be changed, it can always be picked back up and readdressed. That's kind of but I think that process is a way to just say it's not going to go anywhere, and let's not, you know, let's not hurt ourselves by, you know, having an argument, I guess. So that's the
But Tom,
move. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Don't you think, though, that this board has civil conversations and discussions? I
True.
mean, and I really believe that we should play out the process irregardless. Like I said, the predictability of the vote is the vote.
Yeah.
But then it's complete, and we all have things that we feel strongly about, yes, but once the vote is either way, the bell has rung. So I was wondering, instead of tabling, why can we not stick with the process? And not, because I think we've had civil enough discussions as a board that I'm not concerned about creating ruffling feathers or intentionally causing distress or a circus. And I think we have to be careful not to, we get so careful that we don't move forward. And I see the process as a good way to keep consistent and to move forward. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, no,
that's-
and I,
it's not just the policy, but it's just the procedure. And I would say too, it's not going to be the only time that we're going to come across a policy that we'll probably disagree on.
well,
you know?
sure, and there's been many, as someone who has been, Janet mentioned the mask thing, I brought up a lot of things that
Yeah.
I felt had energy toward, and I had people approach me, how come we're not chasing these resolutions down, we're not going, and I just kind of thought, behind the scenes, it didn't go away, even though it looked like the night of the meeting, there was momentum that way, and it just kind of, it didn't get tabled officially here at a board meeting, but it got tabled, the topics I was bringing up were being tabled behind the scenes. And, specifically the vaccine mandate, brought it up one night, 4 board members said they wanted to talk about it. It's been crickets ever since, and I know that has upset people in the community too. And I just kind of go, we're just letting it go, where we're all struggling our way down toward an operating school district without burning the place down and turning it into a bunch of, YouTube greatest hits, kind of a thing. So I just kind of, this was one that, things have not gone, anyway, things have been tabled on the other side of, on other topics too, just not quite in this way, I'd say. So,
I just want to follow up.
that's my-
One of the problems that I saw, just from a logistical perspective of tabling, was that it left it uncertain, to a certain extent, how the board felt about the policy, right? So then it has feedback effects on other policies that are weapons related that we now potentially have to make adjustments to, but the board actually hasn't ruled. So it went through, it was recommended to the board, it was brought forward, but the board has basically said, we're just going to pause this now and not render a decision. And so it leaves us in this sort of no man's land of not knowing. I guess we would just assume, but we're sort of stuck in this weird middle ground because there wasn't a specific reason given. If it was, we need to table this in order to achieve X, Y, Z first, then we would say, oh, okay, well then let's do X, Y, Z, and then we'll come back to the discussion at a certain date. But leaving it sort of nebulous left the policy committee with, well, what was the board's decision then? They were presented with a yes or no, and they said, we're not going to decide at this time.
So,
That was process.
a couple of thoughts on that. I think one, I do agree that the word tabling has caused some confusion, right? I made it clear the other night what I thought it meant, which was that we're removing it from consideration. It's an optional policy. And by removing it, we're not changing policy. So that was thing number one. I think the word tabling, it's the same as saying no thanks. It's the same as saying we're removing it. It's the same as saying we voted against it. They all have the same net effect, which is that it's not being considered currently as a policy.
The problem
I
I have with
disagree.
that, though, is that we didn't actually vote on the policy. We voted on to remove it from consideration, and we need to be able to justify, each board member needs to be able to justify their vote
Yes.
in that regard. So that's my only quibble with it. Because like when we voted to table, I gave my reasoning for why I would vote the way I would. Well, I actually technically am not supposed to talk about that because that was not when we had the FFA here doing their list of things, we weren't at that point to talk about how we felt about the policy. We were talking about whether we were going to consider it or to remove it from consideration. And so that's the only issue that I have with that. I mean, the fact that it happened, I do see that it might be a problem. I don't know the technicalities that you're talking about, but I can understand that concern. And I think that the way it happened is you know, Robert's Rules of Order. I think there's nothing wrong with the way it happened, but that's my regret, is that it wasn't as transparent as it could have been. Now, I also understand that we don't want to necessarily promote a bunch of people giving their thoughts on the, you know, riling up our public about this topic, because I think we all know that our number one goal is to get a bond passed, right? And so we don't want a bunch of talk about something that's not moving us forward in our work necessarily. And that's why I didn't want to talk about mask mandates or vaccine mandates, because they're not in our scope of authority. We have not been given that authority. We have been given the authority on this topic, and that's where I see the differences. So that's my 2 cents on the whole thing.
Well, hearing everybody, I think I will say the reason that I made the motion to table was because I felt like there was I felt like the issue should have been filtered out before it got to us. And so it's being promoted to us for consideration, but it doesn't have to be promoted to us for consideration. So we didn't get to make a decision on that. And so I felt like it would be better if it had never been promoted. And so the way to then not consider it would be to make a motion to table it. So that was my thinking, and I do agree that it's not something that we want to make a habit of, for sure. I think it's a rare kind of issue, for all the reasons that we already know and have talked about. But yeah, so I don't know if and I hadn't really considered the process and who has the authority and when should they bring us issues to consider. I know we get them through OSBA and some other places, but you know, it's basically forcing us to consider and have public comment and have our own debate and deliberation about that issue. And I just felt like it would be better if we didn't do that, and we kind of went back and said, almost like it had never been presented to us, was my thinking.
We do approve the agenda though every time, so that wasn't
True.
we did, all 7 of us approved the agenda.
Yeah, and I'll take full responsibility for my own self for not recognizing that in advance and, you know, being ahead of that. So, for my own response to that.
Right. But one of the other things that there seems to be so there's 3 readings that are requisite to change policy. Right? This is an optional policy that we don't have.
True.
Not considering a policy or not changing policy doesn't require 3 readings. So to not change policy, we don't have to have any readings. We don't have to do anything to not change policy, because there's nothing that requires us to change policy. So the requisite number of readings are as a safeguard against us changing policy without public comment. But we didn't change policy. So that, for me, I'm still stuck on the 3 reading part. I get
I don't
that
even
it
think we
was
have to have 3 readings though. That's not even, I think we have to have 2 at minimum. Is that right? We had
two,
Yeah.
2 are required. We do
Yeah.
3 as
It's
a
just
as a
that that's the
safeguard.
process that we have agreed to,
Right.
and in order to build trust, we want predictability. So that's I think part of the whole thing too.
So for me, I guess I got caught up on semantic. If I would have realized that it was a really important thing to have that 3rd reading and not been thinking about it from the perspective that we don't have to have 3 readings because we're not changing anything, it wouldn't have bothered me if
Right.
we'd have voted it down in the next meeting instead. I
Yeah,
will also
exactly.
say, however, had we not talked about it at all and just voted it down at the next meeting, I doubt anybody would have come to talk about it because we wouldn't have riled anybody up. And so I still don't see the functional difference, if I'm being honest, with what we did versus, I mean, right? So the reason we think a 3rd reading would be very valuable is because we made it an issue at the 2nd reading. But if nobody would have said anything and then just voted it down on the 3rd reading, I think it would have had the same outcome and we'd have had probably little commentary.
I think I
But
would have
that's an
preferred to
assumption.
go to the 3rd reading and had somebody pull it out of the agenda on or 3rd reading and vote separately on that one. That's what I would have preferred, that somebody would have said, okay, let's pull this one out, vote on the rest, and then vote on this one separately. That's how what I envisioned, but, you know.
And it's
I-
not just, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go. I'm sorry, it was me.
No, that's okay. No, I was gonna say, it's more than just, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying about, you know, creating drama where there doesn't need to be drama, but it's a substantive policy. There are arguably, you know, 50% of our community would like to see it in place. And so it seems, you know, to your point, Owen, and I appreciate what you're saying, but it seems like that we do our community a disservice by not even reviewing policies that are an option for us, especially ones that are as substantive as this. So, you know, certainly there are board members who say, I don't need to look at it, I'm not interested in it, I would never pass that in a million years. And then there are community members and other board members who say, no, this is really important. I really want to read this. I want to see it. I want to discuss it. And I want to try to persuade my colleagues that this is an important policy we need to adopt. And so it is more than just an issue of discord, which I understand it's a heated issue. It's also just very substantive. And there is a very real reason to have the conversation and to come to, and I agree with Lori, to have a very civil, respectful discourse
Right.
about a substantive policy.
Right.
Have a vote whichever way we feel compelled to vote,
There
and
you
then
go.
let it run its course.
Also,
And no
I
objection.
do think that that's justifiable in the sense that, again, the legislature gave school boards that authority. There are some discussions that we have that we've spent lots of time on that I'm like, why are we talking about this? We don't have any say. But this one, we did have a say. Now, I agree that the outcome is, you know, that's predictable. I am concerned about controversy where controversy doesn't need to be, just in general. But this is our process. We approved the agenda. Let's see it through, and let's do it civilly, and just know how to talk about how to pull things out. You know, like I moved to vote on this one separately. You know, I think that's, to me, would have been the best solution. But that what happened isn't terrible to me either. I mean, moving forward, we've had this discussion, and we'll think about it differently next time. You know,
Yeah, that's fair. Lori?
Yeah, I still think we should put it back on and see through the process. That's just me personally. And I'm not concerned about the circus, because think of what this board's been through in the last few years, and I think we've kept everything very civil. And we have listened to the hearts of people. And that's the part that bothers me. I still want the public who is invested in this district, who have their children, to come forward. And in a case in point, even with that second reading, we had one for and one against.
Right.
And I believe that that opportunity for the public and for our individual voices should be played out and voted on either way. That's just how I feel for that completion and cycle of the process that we put together. That's just my thoughts. Thank you.
But, I mean, just as a matter of point, anybody can talk during public comment at the next meeting, whether we've set it aside or not. They could still try to convince us and compel us to bring it back, right? So I don't think we're silencing anybody. They can all still share whatever they want to share at the next meeting, including whether they liked or didn't like the fact that we set it aside, right? So I don't, my view is we didn't silence anybody on this matter, that we have a public comment at every meeting and they can talk about anything they want to. So there's that. One other point that I wanted to make, Owen brought it up earlier. It feels to me like on a topic like this, which is an optional policy, it's not being mandated by, legislature, it's not, some kind of issue that we absolutely have to do to stay in compliance. It feels like what should have maybe happened that would have been, in my mind, better, is to bring it forward as a discussion topic at a board work session and say, this policy has come to our attention, it's an optional policy. How would y'all like us to proceed as a work group with this policy? And then we wouldn't have had it, stuffed in with 15 other policy updates as part of a process. And that, for me, would have been I think, a more effective approach. So,
I concur with that. I would have liked to seen that. I don't know if there's other policies that will come across that I'll feel the same way about, but I think in this case, that would have been a better way to go.
So the fact that it was conditional, so do we now create sort of a separate list of what is conditional and what isn't? to consider and how we would put that on discussion. Before I go any further, Dawn has had her hand up for quite some time, and I want to,
We don't
Just-
have public comment.
Yeah, at this point, this is a board conversation.
oh,
so-
okay, well,
I think that we've had, I don't have a problem with the idea of talking about policies separately. I think that we have done that in the past. That's been something that's happened on several policies. It's just been a singleton because of the level that the topic rose to. So I think that that's reasonable.
Well, there are plenty of policies that are optional that are kind of nothing burgers. I mean, in the sense that then we would be in the position of having to curate, okay, here are the 10 optional policies. Which ones do the board, does the board want to see, and which ones are, sort of AR procedural types of things. So it sort of creates potentially another set of issues where the policy committee still has to go through and decide which ones of these is the board going to find, problematic or contentious, which in and of itself seems to overlay the process with a lot of assumptions, so. but your point
Maybe
is-
that's,
I don't
I
know.
mean, I've looked at all the ones that have come through so far, and there's really not been many that rose to this sort of culture war level, right? I mean, I'm not trying to minimize the work that you're talking about in making that decision, but this one feels like it's set a little bit aside from language tweaks and compliance with, I don't, maybe I'm wrong on that, but did the work group even think this might have been a
No.
questionable?
No, it was
policy?
because it was so consistent with all of the other policies that we have with regard to weapons on campus that I don't remember that we had any kind of disagreement at all. It was just, it seemed a very natural one to forward for, I think we probably anticipated there would maybe be more interest in it than normal, but certainly nothing that would be, really
Yeah.
heated and volatile and like, oh boy.
And by consistent, you mean that students can't have weapons. and
Staff can't have
have
weapons.
weapons. And so it makes sense that visitors would also not be able to.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know. So I guess I would like to, just in order to be able to take the temperature in the room, and the vote will go the way the vote will go, but I would
Yeah.
like to move to put this back on our third read agenda. And the board can vote, and,
I would second and be happy to see that. Either way, the vote goes.
So just so moved and seconded, just for clarification. You want it back on
Mhm.
as a third read for the next meeting, the regular
correct.
May meeting.
Just sort of resubmit it into the process, just like normal, just nothing big, we don't have to have any special provision for it. I agree with Jennifer that if we decide at the time to vote that we need to pull it out separate from the other policies, that's a perfectly acceptable way to approach it, because we tend to just approve them in a batch. It's always been part of our process that we can pull policies out if we want to vote on them separately, so that's not a big deal.
So just a question on point of order here. We're in our point of our agenda where we're talking about process, and I know we have the authority to go ahead and vote on that tonight, but I'm wondering if your motion wouldn't be better for our next full meeting, since we tabled it at the last meeting and then untable it essentially at the next meeting, then it would go to a third read like the following full meeting. So that's just a question for,
I mean, I think there's nothing that would preclude us from having this vote and deciding. I agree, the topic was about process, and this is more of a specific request, but I don't think we're out of any order to have the motion, the second, and ultimately a vote. Other thoughts on, I mean, my inclination is to sort of learn from what I've heard. I'm understanding where there was some confusion and maybe not, I think I walked into it with different assumptions too, right? I just don't think we saw it the same way in terms of silencing somebody or not following. I didn't even think there was a process for removing it that required third reading. So from my perspective, there was no procedural problem. I don't see a reason to put it back. I don't see any reason why it would probably change the outcome, and so I would be a no vote, I guess, but that's just sort of where my mind's at. I don't know if there's other,
Yeah, I feel the same way as Jonathan. I won't say anything else because I really feel the exact same way.
I think that I would vote to put it back on just to complete the process and
Same.
be able to be on record and hear from everybody about how, why they're voting the way they're voting.
And I don't really see what it would hurt to bring it back on. I know, I hate to always rely on assumptions, but humans do. And I think Jennifer said it well, the predictability, and also that completion of the process. And if we can honor that aspect of whatever or what any policy comes to us, then we're being as transparent as we can as a board and to the community. And I respect what everyone has shared, but I really would like to complete the process. That's.
any more conversation before we bring this to a vote?
So why would we bring it right to a third reading and not to a second reading? Point of order, I guess.
Well, technically, we had a second reading, or it was on the agenda for a second reading. We had public comment, so it effectively was
Oh,
second.
that was second. That was second.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know. Sure, yes on it. Let's just, we've already had the discussion, so let's have the discussion and the vote. So I say do it, and just, we're already having some drama with, some conflict, so fine. I say bring it on, let's just do it and bring it through, but we need to come, I don't know, this is gonna be a very rare thing, and so I don't have a problem with, I think everyone knows why I voted how I voted, so yeah, I'm fine with it, just to respect the process, sure.
Okay. Any other conversation?
That's why I plan on voting, but see how it goes.
Right.
Unless we wanted to wait to see how Aaron thought about it, because he was a no, but you probably have 4 already, so, we don't need to wait.
Okay.
So unless somebody wants to wait for Aaron, so.
Well, motion to put it back on the agenda for a third read has been made and seconded. We've had discussion. Debbie, would you take the vote, please?
Yes. Jonathan?
No.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
Owen?
No,
Lori?
Yes,
Tom?
Yes.
thanks.
All right.
4 yeses, 2 nos.
Okay, so we'll have it back on the agenda. And just as a, well, I guess we can deal with it when we get there during
Yeah,
the agenda topic.
it'll just be like it was before, and if
Okay.
so.
Thank you, everybody. I thought it was a really good discussion.
Yeah.
I thought it was very
That was
healthy,
great.
and I appreciate the chance to have it, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so that gets us through 3D and 3E. Let's jump back to 3A, which is the bond planning update.
Thank you, Jonathan. And Daniel, you're going to queue up the slides that I have prepared, and give Daniel just a minute to do that. Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Board, for giving me an opportunity to share a little bit about where we are with the long journey we're embarking on towards, hopefully, a bond election. We have a lot of work to do, and I know that you have a ton of questions about how this is going to look. It's been a while since Silver Falls has been engaged in this type of process, and I can tell you already at the start, this process will be unlike any other in terms of the direction that Silver Falls takes towards passing this bond. So whatever has been past practice, I think we're going to study that. I think we have been studying that, but I think there's going to be a lot of new things about this bond. And I want to walk you through a few of them. I would say that where we are right now, I would characterize as in progress. And so I'm going to go over a couple of review slides, and I'm going to tell you exactly where we are and what we're doing, the next steps that we need to take. And so, and this is also, of course, for public record. So some of this is going to be review for you the second, third, or maybe even fourth time you've heard it from me. But I don't think I can say these types of things enough to make sure that everybody's on the same page and everybody has a solid understanding. And in best instructional practice, we call that checking for understanding. So a good formative assessment for you. So we started off with the long-range facilities master plan, which was unanimously approved 7-0. That was an incredibly in-depth process. I think those who were a part of the long-range facilities planning committee would say that, yes, it was a very spirited process, but we all ended in the right place. I would say that there's probably not one member on that committee that doesn't want the same thing, which is what's best for our kids. And ultimately, goal 3, which is that our facilities reflect our love and respect for our kids here in Silver Falls. So then I had a chance to do the follow-up sessions for each K-8 community. So as I said, in the fall, I would come back to each K-8 community to share with them exactly how their feedback and input was used, compare it to what the Long-Range Facilities Planning Committee had already put together, and whatever differences we had, we would add that back in, and that's what you voted on as a board as well. In April, we sent a team from Silver Falls School District. Janet was a part of that. We went to the bonds and ballots training, learned an incredible amount in 8 hours. I'm still astonished at how enlightening that was. We're still talking about it. And then, of course, the listening and learning sessions are continuing. So on May 16th, we have our listening session at Mark Twain, and then on the 26th at Robert Frost. In the fall, we will have the middle school. And most importantly, this will be a really interesting listening and learning session that we will plan for as kind of a separate thing, which is the high school. Those will be in the fall. And then we will be going through round 2 of the K-8 listening and learning sessions as well. So there will be a second round in the winter. It absolutely is necessary. In fact, in my mind, the way I see it, this needs to be an annual thing. It really does. It's a ton of work, but I don't see any way around being there physically to talk to our families about how they see education impacting their child, and then, of course, what our communities would want for their future by way of facilities. No matter when we float a bond to our taxpayers, that part is necessary and will become a staple here in Silver Falls. And so some of the key learnings that came out of the bonds and ballot training, one was hire a public affairs firm. Hire an expert firm that does this stuff for a living. And that's absolutely critical. We cannot go about this bond on our own to try to figure it out. It won't work. And I think that you've gotten to know myself and my team well enough to know that when we go to put this sort of amount of resources and time and energy into something, we need to go about it the right way at the very start. Whenever the board does choose to decide on an elections date, a year's worth of planning has to take place. So whenever that date might be, there's so much planning that needs to happen that we have to get started now. And so that's going to be a little bit of a give and take. We need to appoint a bond committee. I've heard from some of you. I'd still like to hear more. Lori's reached out to me, given me some suggestions. Others of you have as well. And I will take all that with me, and then I'll come back to you on my best thinking about a bond committee. And I'll talk about that in just a minute, because the bond committee will develop a recommendation which will include the scope, size, and timing. But more importantly, it will be a data-driven decision. So it'll be polling data-driven. And because a bond committee cannot make a recommendation otherwise unless we have facts to bring to the board. And you will be a part of all that information. You will not learn that as a result of the bond committee's work. I'll be keeping you up to date in a parallel universe. So, and the third thing is that the listening sessions are absolutely critical. That's another thing we heard repeatedly at the bond training. So what is the plan right now? What are we working on? Well, number one, we're working right now with a public affairs firm that, in my mind, is head and shoulders above all others. I've had the opportunity to check this firm's references with 4 of my colleagues who are superintendents in other districts that mirror Silver Falls. So a couple of them are, I've talked to Roseburg, I've talked to North Santiam about theirs. I've talked to a couple of others that are very similar in size and demographic to Silver Falls. And they all spoke very glowingly of this public affairs firm, had some constructive things to say as well. Steve Nielsen and I met with this firm last week. They're in the process of getting a proposal together. We should see that this week. I don't even want to say who it's going to be yet because we're not done kind of figuring out which way we're going to go. But I can tell you that that the person we're thinking of has a track record that is stellar, and that is used to working in divided districts. This firm also went 6 for 6 during the pandemic. 6 elections, 6 bonds. So that's number one. With the public affairs firm, they outsource the data. They outsource the polling. So they use a firm by the name of Patinkin Research, which is one of the most respected firms in the Northwest. I've heard nothing but glowing reviews on the accuracy of the data that they collect. And we need to get started on that now because the bond committee will need that data to help make decisions on what to recommend to you all. You'll need to base your decisions off of that as well. That's an expensive undertaking, by the way. That's about $20,000. But to think about it in terms of what it would take to pass a bond the size that we need here in Silver Falls, that is a drop in the bucket. We'll probably need 3 rounds of data throughout the life of this, going all the way into an election, from the very beginning to the middle to the end. And we went over certain scenarios with public affairs firm, and he gave us a few examples of where they polled, and when you're at 39% halfway through, you're not going to pass that bond. You're going to have to go back to the drawing board. And so I just would direct your attention to the quote there, that it's not about the one we want, it's about the one that our community will support. So right now, we're in the process of finding a bond committee facilitator. This is key because some districts facilitate these meetings themselves. I don't think that that's the best practice that we should probably entertain. I think we need to have an unbiased person come in who's not tied to other processes that we've had here in this district. I think that's really important to get eyes on it because we will have a spirited group for a bond committee also. We need to have disagreement because what we need to do is get down to what the truth is. And the truth is what our community will support. If they won't support something, why? The most important part is why. And then to try to get to, okay, what can we do then? If we can't go one way, then how do we reorient ourselves and get to a place where we can have broad consensus? So we're in the process of that right now. We were almost settled on that on Friday, and we had a dramatic left turn that I won't go into here, but we hope to have that done very shortly. The bond committee will probably be no more than 20. Anytime we get more than 20, that's just too many folks. So each one of the participants on this committee will be carefully chosen. Again, you will play a big role in that. And they will make that recommendation to you, and then you will decide on when the best time to go for an election date would be. And so right now, we're thinking of May 2023 or November 2023. That's what we will poll on, those two. And I'll have a lot more to share with you in the future. But just keep in mind that it's been strongly, strongly pointed out to us that we cannot, we need at least a year. So if it's May of 2023, and the data will suggest that, and you'll grapple with that as a board and give us direction. If it is May, we got to get started now to at least get the data to figure out yes or no. The only other thing I'd say, just as a matter of public record, is I'm well aware of the sensitivity of what a bond brings up, the feelings that a bond brings up in our community. I spend a lot of time talking to our community members, our stakeholders, and I by no means am, overly optimistic. But at the same time, I think it's important that the 8 of us are able to respond to folks who may see no chance on earth that a bond would ever pass, to say that yes, but the work still starts now. Right? So whether or not that's true, to me, doesn't really matter. There's a ton of work that has to happen. And the problem is, the longer we wait, the more exponentially expensive things get. And if we just decide to go out for a bond, that's a best case scenario, 12 months from when we decide to do that. So I think it's really important that we say, yes, we understand that maybe you're feeling that way now, but just keep in mind, this work has to take place. And a bond is so past due in the school district. I've got to be honest, I don't know where we're going to put our kids in the future. I just don't know. And I don't think it's okay to just chalk it up as an adult issue of just adults bickering over yes or no or giving tax dollars for that. I just don't think that's good enough. I think the 8 of us need to stand up to say, this will affect generations of Silver Falls kids. Whether or not our kids are in school at that time or not doesn't really matter. We're really doing this for our community of Silverton and our adjacent areas, all of Silver Falls, I would say, not just Silverton, but the Silver Falls area. And I just wanted to end on that note, but I'll take some questions before I move on to the next topic.
I just have a quick clarifying question. So we will have polling data
Yes,
in advance of our May versus November
you
decision?
will, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
So by no means will be a shot in the dark for you. I will do everything I can to make sure that every question is answered and that you feel confident that you have the information available to make that decision.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not comfortable as a board making that decision, that too is a decision,
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah.
Well, I appreciate your point about, a community member may not feel like now's the right time, but we have to start now so we know when the right time is. And we're not gonna just go with our gut necessarily. We're gonna have a lot of data that can support our decision. And we just don't know what that is
Yeah.
right now. We just don't know what the appetite is at this point.
I do think it's important to think about it along those lines when you're talking to your constituents. I really do, because you are very influential voices, and that goes without saying. I'm, not saying anything that isn't abundantly clear, but I do think it's very important to put this in the bigger picture of what we're trying to do for the community of Silver Falls.
Scott,
Whether you agree personally or disagree, I still think it's very important. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, the polling data we're gonna
Yes.
get. Who generates the questions? Is it
Yeah,
the pollster?
no, that's a good
Or are
question.
we involved in it? Because quite frankly, I want the pollster to just.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So these are, excellent question, Tom. These are professional pollsters. Patinkin Research is the gold standard. All of my colleagues that have gone through bonds, not just the ones I've asked about the firm that we'd like to work with, have all used Patinkin Research.
Okay.
And that just seems to be very, very accurate data.
I really appreciate Tom's question because the last time there was polling going on, we didn't even, it was just like, there was an email and the poll happened and then
And then
all sorts of
voila.
assumptions started
Yeah.
flying around the community.
Right.
And so, I don't know if that's a danger again, that's gonna happen again, you know? But we had a really bad experience last time, because there was just a lot of concern over why those questions were happening, so.
Do you remember
I
who
agree.
generated the questions?
It
Was
was,
it us in the district?
called the Nielsen Report, was the firm they're in Salem, I think. That's who Paul hired.
I think just having
Oh,
someone
this
who
was-
It
understands,
was the way it was done.
yeah, I think having someone who understands our district, just have a quick review of the questions to make sure that there aren't any in there that are going to
Sure.
provoke a lot of
Poking the bear.
concern and, yeah.
Right.
Because they'll jump right out at somebody who knows, they will jump right out at you.
Because, yeah, like you guys are saying, things came out of that, there was, it just put the board in a very awkward situation, and some of it, I mean, I was just completely blindsided. I'm like, no, we've never even discussed this. No, what are you talking about? And I never saw those questions. And then when they started to trickle out, I was just mortified. And so I can't be the only one that.
No, I liked it. I'm always the outlier on this. I liked it because people had no idea it was coming, so you got an honest reaction. You got the real reaction, and people were pissed off.
Do you
about
remember
those
that meeting in the?
Yeah, I loved it.
auditorium?
I'm still the only guy who loved it because it was honest, and it got people coming to meetings
Okay.
and listening. We had roomfuls of people coming to meetings, which is what you want. So, opinion leaders coming to meetings, and I thought it was great because it settled one of my mom's favorite sayings was sometimes you got to have the argument, and it started the argument, and it got the real emotions out. So anyway, I'm hoping that the questions are not generated by us, not reviewed by us. The public aren't going to know when they're going to come out, and it's a set of questions that a pollster who is experienced in doing this knows the right questions to ask after ask them some questions.
Well, put it this way,
I
I
brief review.
just under the spirit of no surprises, I would find it hard for me to have something go out to the community that you weren't aware of. So I won't make every effort to make sure that you're informed as to who, what, where, when, as it pertains to the polling data. This is new for me also. I've never I've never worked with pollsters in this. The public affairs firm that we'd like to work with outsources to this firm. And so I do know about that famous meeting. It is legendary. It is, and not necessarily in a good way. So we certainly don't want to leave that taste in people's mouths either. I would just hope that we have been through so much the past 2 years with regard to facilities issues, not just with the 15 meetings of the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee, but the 7 listening sessions and the 7 follow-up sessions and all of that, that you'd have to be really out of the loop not to know that the board's interest in at least talking about a bond. I could be wrong, but I will make sure that you're really well informed before that goes out.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that? Okay. Thank you for that. Just a reminder that the 28th is our first Budget Committee meeting, and I hope to see you there. It's at 7 p.m. here, right here. And just wanted to make sure that I gave a shout out to our business office, Steve Nielsen and his team. They have literally been burning the midnight oil, getting all the information together, the reports, and also all of the time that they've taken on the presentation you'll receive as well, our budget message that we've been working on. And just to point out a couple of things. Number one is it would be impossible to talk about this district's budget without tying it directly to the strategic plan. So we will not be spending money in this district where there cannot be made a direct connection to that. So you're going to hear a lot about that. The other is all of the different funding sources that we have. So we've been talking about this for hours in planning meetings on how to represent the complexities of these different funding sources that we have coming in due to COVID. So basically, before we had a couple of different ones. You had the general fund from the state school fund, and then you had Title I, and then you had some other, grants here and there. But we're talking about millions of dollars of federal money that's come in through the state. We now have SIA. We're coming out of COVID now. Next year will be our first year using SIA in a non-COVID situation. You're going to learn a lot about that along with Measure 98. And so that's one part. And we're also going to talk to you about this concept called the funding cliff, because those funding sources, at least for the ESSER funding, are one-time only. So those aren't sustainable funding sources. And that creates a problem and creates a funding cliff. So when that goes away, how are we absorbing that shock back into the system? And then the budget concerns are unprecedented for this year as well. And that's a 10% decrease in enrollment. That number has not changed. Some kids have come into the district, but we continue to lose kids. High school is now below 1,200 for its first time ever. These are big concerns that we have. Increased costs, the cost of salary and benefits keeps going up, it doesn't go down. A 5% ending fund balance. Board policy is 10%. And we also have a full reopener and collective bargaining as well with our licensed association. And right now we are budgeting on those concerns and those facts right now. So there's going to be a lot of information shared. And to the best of my knowledge, none of it will come as a shock to you either. But I think it's important that you have a deep understanding of how this budget was put together, the draft anyway. And one of the things I really appreciate about our Director of Finance is that he is really of the belief, and I agree with him 100%, that no question goes unanswered. And so we have 3 budget committee meetings set. It may go to 3, it may not. But we've also set up a few checkpoints in between where we can have coffee hour, things like that. And there's some procedures and protocols that go along with that. Only a set number of budget committee members can come at once, but we want to make sure that we're having those sessions offline as well to make sure everybody's up to speed. So having said that, are there any questions about the budget season starting?
Do we know, and this is just out here, but how many students would have to register back to our district to bump it up a percentage? Do we not? That might be a Steve question.
Yeah, that's probably a Steve question.
Okay, I'll ask him.
My hope is that, well, right now, if we look at it really pragmatically, I doubt that anybody would like to upend their child's educational experience, whatever that is right now, to come back to Silver Falls in May. So
Oh, yeah.
that's
Yeah, I know.
kind of common sense would tell us that. But we are seeing increases, big increases at Mark Twain with their kindergarten orientation.
Oh, that's good.
I can't remember the exact.
I think it was 80
It was-
at Mark Twain for kindergarten.
Nice.
That's a good number.
That's pretty
And
good.
17 at Silvercrest.
Oh,
So
wow.
these are
So-
really encouraging numbers.
That's really encouraging.
So that's a big number there for Silvercrest, to have that number already. I mean, that's more than they have now. So, so that's a really good sign.
Wow.
At $10,000 a child, that adds up quickly.
Yeah.
So that's really great. And we'll just have to wait and see that. But we're still budgeting on the 10% decrease. If the budget committee approves the budget going forward, it will be on those numbers. If we wind up getting, those kids back, which I doubt we'll get all of them back, then we'll have more money to spend. But the budget committee will be making its recommendation or its approval of the budget off of those numbers.
So I think I can do the math, though, to get your percentage question, though, because I think it was 400 kids, and if it's a 10%, then every 40 kids is
Okay,
a percentage
cool.
point. I'm seeing heads
No,
nods.
Yeah.
that's
That
generally
math.
about it.
Is this
Yeah.
as long as everything
Roughly.
stays the same and
Yeah.
we're not, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, cool. Thank you.
Thanks to the staff for really digging deep into this process. Every year, it
Oh, yeah.
gets more transparent, and I think it is important to have opportunities for committee members to, or just general public
Yeah.
to meet with Steve and get their questions answered. I think that is a great thing for our district, so awesome
Mhm.
job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw that last year, where there were a couple people on the committee that really had kind of a little epiphany. They were getting questions answered that, you know, they were always wondering. They were in the dark and they got their questions answered by Steve. That was really wonderful to see.
School finance can be so cumbersome and complicated to understand. And those of us that
Yeah.
work within it kind of accept that as a different set of laws of the universe. But I do think that our team does a really good job of making sure that every question gets answered. We also are really, I'm thrilled that we have really engaged members that want to be a part of the process as well. So you, as a board, deserve the credit for that, because that's really where the recruitment came from. So thank you for that. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Okay, that's going to move us to 3B, Superintendent Evaluation Planning, and I'll let Jennifer lead us in.
This is not my item. I have no idea about this.
Okay. So this was
But it
added,
says test. I thought Debbie was, is Debbie still there?
Debbie, it was on there before we started discussing the agenda. It was added from a conversation like a month ago.
Yeah, but this is, it says, superintendent evaluation fillable form test.
I made the mistake of assuming you and Debbie had talked about it, so that's my bad.
I thought she just, cause I missed that meeting. I thought she wanted us to test something out or something. Okay?
Got it. Debbie, do you happen to recall what the origin of 3B was?
I'm racking my brain. I thought it came from our policy, or excuse me, our agenda development meeting.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been the last one because it was already there, and
Yeah.
that's why I just assumed it was added.
Did it
for-
come up during future agenda items?
We talked about, yeah, but we ended up having the discussion at the last work session. So
It may
maybe
just have been
a placeholder,
a
maybe.
placeholder, and you didn't make it, that meeting, and I didn't think to ask because I just thought it was something.
Well,
new.
let's, I have
Yeah.
news, so we can discuss.
Okay.
So when we reached out to OSBA about having somebody come in and walk us through like a new timeline and, talking about the option for the, like a survey to be included in the process, there was nobody available during this work session or the next work session, but now somebody is available on the date of the May work
The May
session.
one, yeah.
So if we want to do that, we just need to, she emailed the Friday afternoon, both of us,
Right.
and we can just say, yes, let's do it. But I wanted to talk to you first when we haven't had a chance, so.
Right.
Is this an opportunity then for us as a board to design something or tailor something that's more concise and
You mean like the form?
well, the form, yes. The form is one part, but what I wanted to know, because I thought we were going to discuss sort of how the last session went, but if we're not, that's okay. I would love to see something that's just nicely concise and neat, and I think there's a lot of aspects of it which maybe I'm talking about it too much, but I think we could have done at home as part of our homework, and then had that presented, so it would have saved some of that awkward time, you know,
And I
looking
think
for
that
themes.
that's something that we could bring up then, for
Mhm.
sure. And I don't expect that this is gonna be the last time that
Okay.
I think this is gonna be us being able to talk about things.
Mhm.
And that
Right.
it's not gonna be a done deal at the end. It'll be like, okay, now we know either we are or we aren't gonna do this, survey, and then other aspects that we wanna incorporate. So, we have the choice right now to tell, her name is Janet, you know, what our expectations are. So I think what you're saying is time to have suggestions, right?
Yes.
Based on our last session.
Yes, I think just like everything, you go through something and then you say, well, let's tailor this, let's, just to see our time used. And I think in a smart manner, but also just to honor the process and its importance, because I think there were aspects of it, that I don't think fully encompassed, the respect and focus that we needed on areas as we proceeded with the evaluation. In that I don't feel that we need to be handheld through the process. I think some of that could have been done at home, and then we presented it, so it would sort of have more of a tightly choreographed approach. I hope, and I'll leave it at that. I'm starting to ramble, so. Anyway, I look forward to that time.
Jen, when you mentioned survey, do you mean more of like a 360 type of thing? Okay.
They
Yes.
call it a
Yes.
targeted feedback survey.
Okay, because I know that had been brought up as something that,
Yes.
perfect.
And
Okay.
so it would be an opportunity for her to explain what they do, because in the discussion that Jonathan and I have had with her, and OSBA, basically the questions have already been written, right? They just have a service and this is what they do. And so we wouldn't really have any input in terms of that. We're not gonna start from scratch or do anything like that. She's just gonna explain, I'm assuming that we'll want her to explain their service and what they do and how that would be incorporated into our process. And at the same time, I'm thinking that, you know, the process that we used this year was a copy of the process we used last year, and we've talked about how that really needs to be lengthened out a little bit. It needs to start a little earlier. So those are the two things that I'm hoping to accomplish, and, you know, incorporating some of the suggestions that we have to make the process better for next time.
Yeah.
I will just say I want a better form. Like, we shouldn't
Oh, yeah.
have to struggle. We shouldn't have to struggle, and I'm thinking like just a Google Doc, where you have everything that you need. Like, I felt like I had to scroll up to what does a 1, 2, 3, 4 mean. I had to scroll to the standards, like having it all in one spot, and then if it self-populates into a spreadsheet where we can see it all, it just makes a lot more sense to me. But somebody's got to do the typing. That's the hard.
Yeah, I think that was the other aspect, was the code too, so we all understand which number and how that correlates
Yes.
with the outcome. I think we need to
And
talk
Owen
about
mentioned that.
definitions, and I think, yeah, Owen, you brought that up, and I would agree. That's something worth discussing further.
So like either agree on those 1 through 4 descriptors that they have given, or create our own.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so those are the issues that I'm hoping
So,
that.
so I think what I'm hearing is that there's a lot of head nods that we should go ahead and have Janet come.
Oh,
on
yeah.
In May work session.
Sure.
And then we can have a lot more conversation after she's presented, and, you know,
Sounds great.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, sorry about the mix-up with that. I'll check better next time.
I didn't say anything either, so.
So 3C board goals. So this is something that had been brought up a few meetings back, and you know, we wanted to make sure we got it on to talk about. Board goal planning normally, if it occurs once a year, right? It's an annual type of thing. And this last year, our board goals weren't sort of defined expressly as this board hopes to, you know, I don't know, decide on when we're going to have a bond. I mean, that could be a very concrete board goal, for example. There could be board goals around training. There could be board goals around more nebulous things like, you know, maintaining decorum during meetings. I mean, you can have a lot of different types of board goals. We didn't establish board-specific goals. We piggybacked on the district-wide goals
Right.
and embraced those as our goals, similar to what Scott did from a superintendent position.
Right.
And, I mean, I think both approaches are fine, in my mind. I think they are fine. I don't believe, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe there's any requirement that we create a list of goals. I don't think it's in policy that we have to
No.
have a list of board goals or anything like that. So we're not out of policy, but I do want to have the conversation to get an idea of where the board wants to go and what steps that this board would like to take, if different than what we've been doing for the future year. And I would recommend, if we do anything, that we start it with the upcoming year, which would start
Oh,
July
yeah.
1.
Yeah, I think, was it Aaron that mentioned to do something like that in the summer, before the year? But I thought Scott had mentioned he had some thoughts about the goals, and did you want to recap that?
Well, I guess, my initial thought would be that this might be a good thing to focus your work as a board, for you to have that discussion on how you might provide, how you as a board would provide the most focused leadership for Silver Falls School District. And you have two, you have one really big one in front of you, which is goal number 3 of the strategic plan.
Right.
Absolutely.
Which is really, the plan that I operate from. But also other things that you can do to support that work of executing the strategic plan. Not in the technical things that's sort of in the realm of my team, but you as a board and how you would support that work. So I just, when we think about goal number 3, it'd be absolutely impossible to do that work without a unanimous commitment from the 7 of you. And so to kind of be thinking about it along those lines, and then, if there are other things that you feel that you would like to align to in terms of the more operational things that we're dealing with that may bring more focus, then I'd certainly want to know about that from my role. Those are just my initial thoughts.
Mhm. So, I think the idea of trying to tackle this during the summer does also make sense in terms of just sort of normal workload. We tend to have a lighter workload in general. I'm not clear. I think for me, the only challenge with board goals, and I've seen the ones that we had years ago, Owen, I think, well, there were board goals when you were on the board
Yeah,
years
so.
back too, right? But they weren't, Tom, do you remember specific board goal? What I remember is that they didn't have a lot of teeth and they weren't terribly actionable. They were kind of nebulous.
Yes.
So in my mind, I'll just add this to what I was saying earlier. That is, if the board came up with that one thing,
Yeah.
that one thing that above all was the most important thing that the 7 of you were unanimous about, that's something that we could use to communicate to Silver Falls, that here in this district, that is the board's #1 goal this year. And it doesn't, in my mind, it doesn't even have to be something specific. It could be totally aspirational, but related to what our focus is. I just use goal number 3 as a really easy one because
Sure.
it is the greatest challenge we have in front of us, the 8 of
Yeah.
us.
I got no argument. I think my question for all of you to be thinking about is this. It's one thing to decide on goals, it's another to decide the framework with which we decide on goals, right? So, we might all be coming into this conversation similar to apparently the tabling of a policy last time with a different mindset on where this is even gonna go, what it even means. Is it aspirational or is it measurable? Is it, and I don't wanna end up sort of spinning, trying to figure out something. So I want everybody to be thinking about that
Okay.
first, and maybe the right thing to do is to have another, maybe at our next work session, brief conversation about, have you all thought about this? Do you have things you want to share? Do you have ideas that you want to try to coalesce around so that by the time we get to, say, July, and we want to talk about board goals, we at least all know what we're all talking about.
Yeah, I think that's a good plan. And it can be a goal. It doesn't always have to be goals. but it
Yeah.
can be a goal. And I think Scott has given us a really nice concept that would be something that we could rally behind. And true, I think of it as centering, you know. I think now that we're coming back into out of COVID and things are coming back to new, I think there's a lot of positive grounding from it that would be important for the board, although not actionable. But I think what Scott has explained, certainly not nebulous either. It is something that we could probably all
Oh, yeah.
contribute and rally behind. So that's how I'm looking at it. And
This is one
so-
thought that I have is that we've come so far in improving our systems and our processes, whether
Yeah.
it's the evaluation process, whether it's our policies, just our basic board governance, our board agreements. So like, I think we've done so much good work in kind of checking those systems boxes
Right,
that I kind of agree with Lori in the sense of, if we decided, and it's just something to chew on, if we decided the singular, most important thing we can do this year is support the bond work.
right.
What would we need as a board in order to be most effective in doing that? And so to think about, what kind of training might we need? Do we need some, team building facilitation? I don't know. Whatever we as a board decide, other than the data and the polling and all of those things are going to happen anyway, how can we be most effective in that role? So that's just kind of a different way to think about it, sort of the flip side of like, well, these are all the things we're going to do. I think we know what we need to do. I think
Right.
it's, to a certain extent, well, yeah, what do we need to be engaged with individually and as a group in order to be most effective in that work? So that might just be one way to think about it.
I totally agree with Jonathan's sentiments. What I think of when I hear let's start a new initiative is how the heck are we gonna make this happen? And so the facilitation of making us have one voice, but I really like what Scott has to say. Maybe he would agree to facilitate us on that because I
Yeah.
like his vision. So that would make me feel much more comfortable moving forward.
I think it's important in this that is something as simple as all having the same understanding of what a goal is.
Mhm.
Right.
Because I think each one of us, if we were going to write down what we think would be something a little bit different. And so my thought was, I like the idea if Scott is willing to kind of help us come to a common understanding.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, it might even be something, I'm just thinking off the top of my head right now, that what if the board came up with a goal to focus on trust? Because at the end of the day, whether or not we pass our bond will be directly proportional to that quality that this district has committed to. Because there's so many different ways that we can go about as a district to achieve a goal like that. Whether it's listening sessions or building a single narrative around a bond or other things, that might be an aspirational type of goal you might consider as a 7-member board. If we can get to a place where we all have a similar understanding of what that looks like. So if we were able to define trust as consistency over time, or consistency divided by time would equal trust, and then how would we get there would sort of be the responsibility that the 8 of us would have to inch towards that. So that's just if you took just that concept of trust, what might that look like in terms of Silver Falls?
And then the overarching purpose of that for our board would be that we would have that decision made, if you will, and that would give us something to measure and look at all of our activities and evaluate whether or not we're moving forward to that goal.
Yeah. We do know that we have considerable consternation around some sensitive topics as a district, and no stakeholder in Silver Falls would argue that point. So it could be that this could be the one thing that brings us together to talk about how we're going to negotiate these things that'll bring us closer together, not further apart. Just something to
So then to poke a little bit, I heard Jennifer Andoin mention it. Are you willing to help sort of guide a conversation?
Sure.
Would you
Yeah,
be
I'd
willing to do
happy
that?
to.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
No, that sounds pretty good.
But I agree with Jennifer that, you know, where in the world are you going to find time? Who's going to follow up, you know? And we don't want it to be about that. What we want to do is just clarify what it is that we're committing to. So it's not more work or an additional initiative. It's just committing to why is it that we're here for this year? What do we need to do together?
So maybe June work session or July?
Might be a good one for the summer.
Yeah, June, well, by the June work session, school's out typically, so
Mhm.
it could be June or July. Let's play it by ear, maybe.
I do have a couple of things that I'd like to try out with you all this summer at some of our work sessions. A little bit around group dynamics that I think would help develop this type of a concept that we could share together. So I'll stay tuned for that.
Okay.
That's great.
Well, I
And if I could just add, I think the June one's a good one, just because a couple things, since I've been here 1 year longer than Scott has, is that July work session sometimes is another one that sometimes can get moved aside because we're busy. And I also know that that July one also starts to get that ramp up for the school year and whatnot. So I think at least trying to circle back to this conversation around, or having the goals conversation for that June seems to be a little, I think will allow you guys to be thinking about what that looks like for July and August, if that conversation happens in that June work session.
I just have to say I've been absent at one meeting my entire career here, and I probably am gonna be gone in that one, so.
Oh.
I mean, that's not a reason for you not to. I'm just telling you ahead of time that I might not be there. I'm gonna be in Europe.
Nice.
Well, I don't blame you for not calling me.
Yeah.
Zoom might not be enough.
Yeah, that's a pretty good excuse.
Anything else? Okay. My screen went to sleep. That was the last agenda item, right? Okay.
And we've already been, done the first reads, so
And
we're
went through
ready for number
policies.
4.
We are ready for number 4. Without objection, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.